Hi, my name is Eleanor Tatum, and I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief of the New York Amsterdam News. The coronavirus crisis has brought serious distress to local economies and advertising along with them. The New York Amsterdam News has partnered with the Local Media Association during this unprecedented crisis. Help us continue our important work in chronicling the life of Black New Yorkers, and consider making a donation to the COVID-19 Local News Fund today. Go to givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Again, that is givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Thank you and stay safe.
It's Thursday, September 10th, and welcome to the New York Amsterdam News Podcast. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. On this week's episode, my guest is Ben Jealous, president of the progressive advocacy group People for the American Way. He's going to be speaking with me about several issues, including the ongoing protests across the nation over racial justice, the 2020 presidential election, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Ben Jealous served as president and CEO of the NAACP from 2008 to 2013 and was the youngest leader of the organization at age 35. He previously ran for governor of the state of Maryland as a Democrat in 2018. Jealous was selected as president of People for the American Way in June. Since taking the position, he's been on the front lines to get President Donald Trump out of the White House and getting Joe Biden elected. And he's with me on the phone right now to discuss several issues that are going on in the nation. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Jealous. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. It's good to hear you, brother.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a while since you and I have spoken. We've spoken quite a bit over the years, especially when you were the president and CEO of the NAACP. One of the things that I did not mention in the intro before is that you are actually the first non-white person to hold the position as president of the organization. Can you talk first? I know you just got there. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on with you and the organization?
Sure. Well, look, it's good to be at People for. People for the American Way was co-founded by Congresswoman Barbara Jordan and in 1981. Barbara Jordan then was what AOC is now. She's been the most powerful woman of color, most powerful woman in many ways amongst the young congressional members, a real force. And she also, at the time, was living in a loving relationship with another woman. Mm-hmm. And so as two founders, they were tremendously diverse. One black and gay, the other white, straight, both deeply committed to creating an organization that wasn't just interracial or even intergenerational, but intersectional. They were founded early 1980s, right after the launching of several big social movements, or the culmination of social movements, everything from Brown v. Board to the rebellion at the Stonewall. And we were founded with the intention of supporting all of those great civil rights struggles, and most importantly, the American tradition of building a nation that's ever more inclusive and ever more supportive of all of our families being able to achieve the American dream. And of course, right now, we're in a moment that's very different, where we're really, as a nation, we are led by a president who is a white supremacist, is a racist, is against everything that really defines our nation. We have a president, Mr. Trump refers to wounded veterans as losers. He's literally dismantling post offices, ripping up blue postal mailboxes, even in Harlem. He is, that said horrible things about immigrants and about Mexicans. Showed utter antipathy and disrespect towards black families, goes to Wisconsin and doesn't even visit the family of the young man who was killed. And so I decided that after 6 years of experiencing what it's like to be the nation's youngest retired civil rights leader, that it was time for me to get back on the battlefield, back engaged, leading a civil position again. And in People for, I saw what really is in many ways the most modern of the civil rights groups, the most inclusive of the major civil rights groups. and I'm very excited for what we're doing and what we're about to do.
All right. So, absolutely. You definitely had the experience. I watched your work when you were president of the NAACP. So there's no doubt in my mind that you start learning the position that you need to be in. I do want to talk to you about the ongoing protests that are going on across the country right now. We've seen a lot of shocking video. We've seen a lot of shocking deaths of African Americans in this country on video, whether even seeing them in the news or hearing about them. Jacob Blake, of course, comes to mind, and more recently, Daniel Prude in Rochester, New York, which is actually the front page of our newspaper this week, is the image of him with the spit bag over his head, which, ultimately led to his death. Tell us what your thoughts are about these ongoing protests. And there's a lot of controversy even about the way these are being handled. What are your thoughts on them?
Daniel Prude, that situation. First of all, Rochester is a real place. It's, when I was president of the NAACP, we used to get death threats from the Klan up there with some frequency. I saw Frederick Douglass's statue torn down there.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing the police leadership retire, quote unquote, en masse, because they feel that they've been disrespected or misportrayed. Apparently, more concerned about the words that are directed towards them rather than the actions of their officers. And this would be a moment for leadership. It's one thing if the community is calling for you to resign, if you're being fired, but if you are the police chief and your officers just misbehaved in a profound way, literally misbehaved, literally, should have done one thing and did something else, and it resulted in the death of a man, I think you would feel some obligation to stay there and fix things. Somebody else wants to fire you, that's one thing. You should. But do you quit in a moment like this? I don't think so. Anybody who's led anything, you have days that are nightmares, and that's not when you quit. That's when you dig in and you try to dig out and figure out how to get everybody to higher ground and make sure a tragedy like that doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think the important thing is that we never lose our outrage, and then we find the most expedient ways to make sure that public safety works for everyone. Literally, it's the first civil right. It's not the First Amendment. It's the first purpose of the U.S. Constitution: justice, tranquility, safety. What America's learning is what Dr. King tried to make sure we understood, that you cannot have peace without justice. The peace, the absence of justice, not peace at all. It's silence, and it can be deafening, but it's also destructive. We have an opportunity in this country right now to leap forward on public safety. Now, it's going to require that we're highly pragmatic, because public safety is a highly pragmatic thing. It's also going to require that we're highly visionary, because democracy is a visionary thing. And our vision of justice has always been incomplete. We have been comfortable with the majority of the population, maybe even getting that vision. But honestly, I think if you pull back, you'll find that it never was the majority of the country. It was like maybe a majority of the middle class, a majority of the upper middle class. Because right behind blacks and being mistreated are poor whites. Think about this, right? They'll say to you, black men are 3 times as likely or 4 times as likely to be killed by the police in Minnesota as white men. Okay. Well, there's a lot more white men. So what's actually happening? I don't ever hear about white men being killed by the police, and yet it's a significant number if it's only 4 times that of black men, because there's so many black men who are being killed. And what that means, and then when you look at the justice system, who does the justice system have disproportionate contact with? Well, kind of black people generally, lower income black folks, and the white community almost exclusively, who of course are numerically the biggest group in the white community. Mm-hmm. And so if you have police killing black folks and we're seeing it, and you have police killing white folks and we're not seeing it, and many communities, commonly here it's 4 times more likely, and there's about 4 times more white men than black men. We got a lot of Americans being killed by the cops, and we just need to admit that we've all been sold a bill of goods when it comes to public safety, and we could be doing a whole lot better. I don't understand why, in the case of Mr. Prude, if somebody's running around naked and mentally deranged, who you send exclusively are people with guns. Mm-hmm. And when I was a kid, my mom was what someone was in our community called a crisis intervention counselor. Mm-hmm. Her job was when there was, my mom's not big, I'm a big guy, I'm 6'4", 280. My mom's like 5'6", 110. And my mom would go and literally respond to domestic violence incidents instead of the police. And sometimes the police were, a block away. Sometimes they were 50 yards away. Sometimes they were on the sidewalk and mom was in the front yard, getting between a husband and a wife. But the whole idea was that in the middle of the eye of that storm should not be somebody with a gun. And it's similar with the mentally ill. Black mentally ill people being killed is so common that a professor now at John Jay School of Criminology, Criminal Justice in New York City, but then at the time when I dealt with him, he's at UCLA. His name is Phil Goff. And Phil would do these live subject studies to test how different types of police officers would deal with the same situation differently. And what he would do is he would get actual officers to sign a waiver, and then those officers would, be participating in a live subject study where they would be studied, and they would take 2 tests. One test would test their quote-unquote implicit bias. Put it in common terms, their racism. The other one, I believe, tested what he referred to as aggressive masculinity. In more common terms, their authoritarianism. So you have, this set of officers over here, they are authoritarian and they are racist. And these ones over here are authoritarian but not racist. And those ones are racist but not authoritarian. You break them up into different groups. And then you would test them all with the same scenario. And the scenario, similar to Mr. Prude, was an actor, a black actor, pretending to be mentally deranged and violent without being clearly deadly violent, waving a big stick around, appearing to be homeless and mentally deranged. And I remember in particular, I saw a pair of responses. One was from an older officer who was like Archie Bunker with a gun. He was very high on implicit bias. He was racist, but he was chill. He was very low on authoritarianism. The other officer was more like Vanilla Ice. He was young. I remember he had like a very stylized haircut. He was white. Mm-hmm. He was not racist, very, very low on implicit bias. But he was wound up tight. He was authoritarian. You better do what he said or there will be consequences. Archie Bunker talked the mentally ill man down. Took him 3.5 minutes to talk about a mentally ill black man waving a big stick. But he talked him down. Their shots were fired. The Vanilla Ice-ish character, if you will, it's not nice. I guess it's not fair to Vanilla Ice, but the young officer who was not racist, however, who was very authoritarian, shot the man in 15 seconds. Mm. And so it requires us to really just take a deeper look at what's going on here. And what you find is that for certain types of abuse, yes, racism is the biggest problem. But for death, authoritarianism is the biggest problem. Mm. And specifically, what is the last word most oftenly uttered before a police officer puts a bullet through you? Person who's shot. Mm-hmm. The epithet for gay men that begins with the letter F. Mm. You insult an officer's masculinity, as they may perceive it, or, sexual orientation more accurately, and it may be the most deadly thing that you do. In my life, and I've spent my entire adult life working on this issue, so out in the streets over the Rodney King case, I think I was 20 years old. I went to jail with Sharpton in the Diallo case, and it goes back a long ways for me. Find yourself on this journey, and you start listening to kind of the elders and the wisdom that they bring. And let me just share kind of two thoughts with you, Josh.
Sure.
One's from one's from Rockford, Illinois, not Rochester, New York, but Rockford, Illinois. And I was up there with Reverend Jesse Jackson. I don't know, it was approximately like 2010, relatively early in my tenure as president of NAACP. And a man had been killed by that officer. The officer who shot him was that one that if you saw him, you knew that's the guy. That's the guy who keeps shooting people in the community and getting away with it. And so this man ran for kind of like understandable reasons. I mean, it was widely known that this officer had shot multiple people in a community where often this guy does. The man that ran, the warrant that was out for him was for a domestic disturbance, not a domestic assault. Nobody been hurt, no blood, no battery, just a loud argument between a man and a woman the night before. And when the officers arrived, the man had left and put out a warrant for him for domestic disturbance. And he saw that the officers pursuing him was the officer that keeps shooting people. And so he ran into a church for refuge. You run into a church, typically the officer needs to deal with the head of the church. That the officer cannot enter without permission and not with their gun drawn without permission. This officer did not care about the long-standing, this goes back literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years in Western culture. Big sanctuary in the church. Barrels into the church. The man sees him, and he darts into the daycare center. The officer pursues him. The man hides in a closet. The officer orders the man out of the closet with his arms up. The man walks out of the closet with his arms out, and the officer shoots him dead. Multiple bullets in front of daycare children. The officer didn't even bother to order out of the door. And Jesse Jackson and I show up there a couple weeks later for a mass meeting. Daycare children are losing their hair. Old girls losing their hair. Nothing in life prepared them to have an officer invade not their church, but their church daycare and execute a man, nonviolent, unarmed, in front of them. And I've been talking about bully cops. I got corrected. An old teacher came up to me afterwards and said, "Mr. Giles, I heard you. She's saying that these officers are a problem with bullies." She said, "I got to tell you, most of the officers, one way or the other, came in front of me at some point, passed by me when they were going through school here. I've been teaching the local, forget which level, the local public school my entire life, and I saw them all in the playground or in the class or in the hallway. And I got to tell you, Mr. Giles, I don't see the young people who are bullies down working at the police department. No, what I tend to see are the young people who were bullied. And what it gets down to is that there's actually a narrow band of personality types that are the most likely to kill you. And they disproportionately apply to be officers. Yeah. I have a friend who's mayor of a small city where they took Professor Goff's advice and they figured out how to use personality tests to weed out people who otherwise would have become an officer, but are predisposed to kill people when they shouldn't. 75%. That's the last test they give you. 75% of the people who take that test have passed every other fitness exam. They are physically fit. They are otherwise mentally fit, emotionally fit. However, there's a little wrinkle to their personality. They're authoritarians. Right? If you don't do what they tell you to do, well, they might just kill you for no reason anybody else would understand. Mm-hmm. And that's the hard work that we got to do. Narration is proof that just putting black faces in high places is not going to take care of it in law enforcement. Right. Too many of us have been abused by black officers. No, there's something a little deeper here, and we've got to be smart, and then we got to transform public safety.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, there was some information that was sent over to me by your team, and this is some information that I did not know until it was until I got it. And it said that Trump support, and I'm shifting the conversation to the election now, that Donald Trump support among black voters rose 9 percentage points during the Republican National Convention. And I did not know that. And this is actually from a poll that came out shortly after the convention here. And I do want to shift the conversation to the presidential race, 2020 presidential race, because I know that's something that you're very passionate about, that your organization, People for the American Way, is very, very passionate about. One of the things that you mentioned that I got from your team also is that you're speaking a lot about Trump's fear-mongering and the defense of white vigilantes. Can you talk about that? Because race obviously is a big issue in this campaign right now, and Trump seems to be using it to some sort of advantage. I don't know if it's good or bad, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Trump is a very smart marketer. He is not worried about sincerity or integrity. He's just simply trying to sell a product, in this case, it's himself. And they've engaged in some pretty savvy marketing. With that said, there'll be a lot of conversations in a lot of black families, between now and the election. I think you'll see that little bumpy gut, erode. We have a chance here to really. Our country is facing 4 crises. Crises in public safety, the pandemic, the recession the pandemic has spurred, and climate change, which ravages our communities. I was president of NAACP, we did a study on social vulnerability, the communities that are most socially vulnerable, the weakest politically, the poorest in the country, and the communities most likely to be impacted by climate change disasters, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, and they fit like a hand in a glove. Donald Trump is only making each of those worse. You ask about vigilantes. Case in point, literally at that convention, Donald Trump brought a couple that waved guns at Black Lives Matter protesters. And literally during that convention, saw a young man shoot protesters at a Black Lives Matter rally. Same man was seen at a Trump rally, photographed. It's a straight line from dot to dot to dot. We've never seen a president call on vigilantes to target protesters in our country. It has never happened. Sure, we've seen it in a lot of countries that we don't consider to be on our level. We're supposed to be leading the world in human rights. And we have a treacherous president who's literally calling on vigilantes to persecute his own citizens for exercising their constitutional rights. We've never seen anything like this. And Donald Trump is fundamentally the most anti-American president of the United States I've ever seen in my life. Calling wounded warriors losers, attacking the post office, failing to confront Russia over bounties on soldiers' heads, referring to immigrants as murderers and rapists because they're immigrants, mocking disabled. His treatment of women is so profane and makes you shake. It's so offensive, and yet it's a litany. I mean, literally has the DOJ this week weighing in to try to get a defamation charge against a woman who's accused him of rape. And honestly, I think most people believe this man's pretty capable of rape. Like his mindset. And so, that's what we're dealing with. And I think Biden can win, but we got to be smart marketers too.
Right.
We've got to invest more in going after Latino voters. We've got to invest more in going after young voters. We've got to make sure everybody turns out. I mean, this is one of the things that keeps me up at night. And our response is called Defend the Black Vote. We will roll it out formally in a few weeks.
Okay.
We will be focused on reaching 1 million black men between 18 and 35 and making sure that they have a plan to vote by mail and that they follow that plan. We'll be doing it over text. We need volunteers to sign up. We'll ultimately take about 10,000 people to get this done, but we can get it done together. We can get it done with 1,000 if they work hard. Because each one of these million individuals, you have to get about 7 texts. And we'll have a whole system to make that easy for you. But the thing I'm losing sleep over these days is the adoption of new technology in voting. Now, you might say, well, mail is pretty darn old technology. That's true, but it's new for people for voting in most places. And what we found in other places where it's been universally adopted, like Oregon, is that by the second election, pretty much everybody's doing it. Now, forward for people to figure this out by the second election. And even more disturbingly, in the first election, it often benefits conservative candidates. Why, you ask? Because everything that makes you more likely to use the mail, the older you are, the more likely you're comfortable with using the mail. The more privileged you are, the more likely you've only had one address for a long time and your mail finds you easily. Everything that makes it easier for you to, more likely that you'll vote by mail makes it more likely that you'll be conservative.
Right.
A lot of effort going on, but when we looked at the matrix, what it seemed like maybe being overlooked pretty substantially is making sure that young black men know how to vote by mail and have a plan and do it. And so we will be, over the next 2 months, doing it. We're doing it in the name of John Lewis, and his family's permission. John reminded all of us, just with his very being, that I don't care if it's hard. I don't care if it's even dangerous in John's case. Like, just vote. Just vote. And we got to make sure young brothers vote.
All right. We're just about a month and a half away, maybe even a little less or a little more, from the presidential election. You said that the Biden-Harris ticket is the winning ticket. And I do want to know your thoughts on them. You've talked a lot about Donald Trump, which I think is really good so people understand your thoughts on that. But I want to know your thoughts on the Biden-Harris ticket, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, who made history. The debates are coming up soon, so that's definitely something that's going to be widely talked about. But what are your thoughts on Joe Biden and Kamala Harris?
Joe's a nice guy. I think I've known him for years. He's a good person. Sometimes say things that he regrets saying. But his heart is always consistent. He's always trying to do the right thing. Bernie Sanders had said that he'll be the most progressive president we've ever had. That Joe Biden will be the most progressive president that we've ever had, and I believe that's right. It's coming in a time of great crisis on multiple fronts. And I believe that he will take the country in the right direction. Kamala Harris, I've known for 15 years, since we were much younger. And when she was just a newly minted DA. And I was wowed by her courage then. And I still am. Kamala became DA of San Francisco as an avowed progressive, outspoken opponent of the death penalty, a state that had one of the biggest death rows in the country, still does it. And she becomes DA. And a 19-year-old boy, if a 19-year-old's in your house, he's a child, but they get charged, we call him a juvenile or a young adult, boy, child. 19-year-old black child is accused of killing an officer. And it's a troubling case. The person's been killed is always troubling. An officer's been killed is even more troubling. And the specifics of this case were very troubling. And the entire liberal establishment in San Francisco came down on the young Kamala Harris, newly minted district attorney, to make an exception. Just make an exception for when officers have killed Kamala, please. Dianne Feinstein did that from the pulpit. at the church where the officer was being memorialized, called out Kamala, pressured her in public. Legions more pressured her behind the scenes. Kamala was resolute. The death penalty is wrong. Every other Western nation knows that. The death penalty is racist and classist, and this boy is black and poor. There's no way I'm making an exception. That could only highlight how wrong it is. There's no reason I'm making an exception when I just know that it's wrong. No, you elected me to do right, not wrong. Those are the gist of Kamala's arguments. And they told her, you'll never get elected again. Don't forget, San Francisco might be liberal in a lot of things, but this is Dianne Feinstein country. We're way more conservative in criminal justice than anything else. Of course, Kamala got elected again, and promoted to the U.S. Senate, is now running for vice president. Some folks will say, DAs now could be a lot more progressive than Kamala Harris was then. That's true. You know what else is also true? Those DAs would not likely have won their races but for Kamala Harris. See, two movements came out of Kamala Harris's first campaign. Mm-hmm. The first one we know as Emerge. Literally a bunch of donors who were super excited that they got a woman elected DA of San Francisco. Kept going. And they and Kamala launched Emerge to help women win from coast to coast. Second is the movement to elect more progressive and more black district attorneys. When Kamala was elected, there were 4. I mean, you could count them on one hand and still have your thumb. 4 black elected district attorneys of jurisdictions of more than 200,000 people. And none of those were progressive. And there's a similar number of progressives in the country, like 4. What Kamala did was she raised a ton of money. And she used some of that money to figure out how do you push voters' buttons emotionally in a way that moves them in a more progressive direction. She was always going up against candidates who had the support of the prison guards union that was pushing voters' buttons to move them in a more conservative direction. And that playbook made it possible 2 years later, I think it was Craig, I think it was Watkins or Williams, to become the first black DA of Dallas. Craig raised $36,000 the first time he ran and lost. He was 36 years old. And then when he was 40, he ran and he won, and he raised $40,000. And he so lifted Kamala's playbook that on his website in Dallas, there were places that said here in San Francisco because he was cut and pasted Kamala Harris's website. But that was the value for her. She unlocked running and winning for a generation of local, statewide politicians who came after her, who benefited from the training from Emerge, who were women. And she unlocked DA's offices to progressives and people of color in a transformative way. She's already been a transformative candidate, and I'm very excited about her candidacy for vice president.
All right. And I think a lot of us are excited for it as well. One of the things I also wanted to talk to you about was
Howard Biden is vice president.
I know. Well, I love that. Yeah, I went to an HBCU myself, so that's like great news to me. The first black woman, black vice president, going to an HBCU. That's fantastic. So yeah, I'm definitely hyped about that.
That's the way it should be, brother.
Yeah.
That's the way it should be.
One of the things I also wanted to talk to you about, if you could talk briefly, is about the COVID-19 pandemic. It is ravaging our community, the black community, the hardest. We're getting it. It's being spread more within our community because of societal issues. And one of the things I keep saying about the COVID-19 pandemic is that it revealed so many of the disparities that people just thought didn't exist, or they thought they knew they existed but just didn't want to talk about them. What are your thoughts on the pandemic? What do you think is the solution here, if you have one? And just let me get your thoughts on it.
Well, one thing, man. I'm sitting here planning to go take a walk after this for a couple of miles because I've gained my COVID-19. And I pointed out because I'm a black man with a BMI of 35.
Okay.
And we all got to know our BMIs right now, and we got to be losing 19.
Absolutely.
If your BMI gets above 4, there's like 100% chance that you die.
Yeah.
No one, they've yet to find a patient that survived with a BMI. Some people have by the grace of God, lost a ton of weight while they were being treated. Their BMI dropped below, but let's not count on that being your life raft, right? Like
absolutely.
All of us, obesity in our community was a problem before COVID. Now deadly in a real short-term way, not a long-term way.
Right.
So we all got to go out. I was talking to a brother the other day, a little bit of support group at work, and he's lost 20 pounds, and I aim to be next. But that's to say that, my generation of black folks, our death rate is 10x our white peers. And you can console yourself because we're disproportionately incarcerated or we're disproportionately don't have health care, and I'm not in prison, I got health care, so I'll be okay. No. I have a buddy the other day I went to Columbia University with. As far as black men go, we may not have started off in rich places, but we've ended up okay. He's an executive at a big bank. I ain't quite doing as well as he is, but, I'm doing okay. And in 1 week, he lost 5 friends. 5 black men, all under 55. All died in his life, including the starting line of, half the starting line of his basketball squad. I think it was in a Riverside Church basketball team from him back in the day. And 3 of them were pretty well off, and 2 of them weren't. But 3 of them were. They had health care, and they had good jobs. And so I say that to say that we've got to take this deadly seriously. And I believe the biggest danger to us as individuals is we get kind of lazy, get a little bored, start taking risks we weren't taking 2 months ago. And all of a sudden you get COVID. And if your health's not what it should be, chances that you're going to die are pretty high.
Right.
On a more macro level, I think for us in the black community, COVID's pretty intimate. I've lost, a few people in my life now. So I got to acknowledge the intimate. But the more kind of a little bit of a colder, more macro, bird's eye view level of the disease, we got to get Donald Trump out of office. He's a charlatan and a huckster, and he's dangerous to the American people. He misleads us intentionally. He makes jokes that turn out to be deadly for others. Kind of waxes about how bleach will cure COVID. And then all of a sudden, all New York City is overwhelmed. I mean, my God. And now he's put somebody in place as a proponent of herd immunization. Herd immunity would require 2 million Americans to die from the disease. We're only at a little under 200,000. I don't want to know what it's like to 10x that. And we're also a nation that's like an epicenter for the world for its commercial activity. So we get to herd immunity. We're never really going to be at herd immunity because people will be coming in, people will be going out, and folks will want to travel, and So we have to get Biden in office, if only, so we can get beyond this pandemic in a way that makes some sense. We can deal with the public safety crisis in a way that makes sense. We can deal with climate change in a way that makes sense, that we can get through this recession guided by something closer to the values of FDR, far away from those of Donald Trump.
All right. Well, we have our last few minutes here in the podcast. I did want to ask you about the census, because that's definitely something that we are pushing people to fill out. The deadline is coming near, and I do want to get your thoughts just for these last couple of minutes that we have here about the U.S. Census.
Everybody has to be counted, and it's critical. You may be like, whoa, the survey feels a little invasive. It's really not that invasive. It takes a couple minutes. Like, if you were like me and you're not the best with the mail, and you're like, did I throw that out by mistake? Just go online. You can find it pretty easily. It's super easy to fill out everything for your household. I admit I misplaced my census form. I didn't throw it out. I just, stack of papers over in the corner.
Right,
but I figured out how to do it on. It was super easy. Like, real talk. You got to fill out your census. And why? Because it gets more resources to your community. You got to make sure that your community is counted in its fullness. So all the different types of resources that flow based on size of population, demographic of population, flow to your community. And it takes something like 4.5 minutes to fill it out. It is less than 5.
Right.
But you got to do it. So please fill out the census. What I'd also say is that we got to be vigilant on redistricting. There'll be a lot of missions. You got to be vigilant on redistricting. One thing I'm proud of the Amsterdam News in New York City is kind of the last census. They, Hazel Dukes, all that whole Bill Lynch back in the day, that whole mafia up in Harlem,
yes,
made sure that the governor counted inmates in the communities where they were from.
Yeah, I remember.
Prior to
remember that.
They had been counted where they were in prison, which makes no sense. Those places were getting extra money for their schools. And
right. I remember that. I remember that exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and so that's why it matters. That's why it matters.
All right. Well, listen, thank you so much, Mr. Jealous, for being on the podcast. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you again. We hope to speak with you again in the future, and thank you so much.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
That concludes this week's podcast. You can pick up the latest edition of the New York Amsterdam News on newsstands and get updates online at amsterdamnews.com. You can also keep up with us on Facebook at NY Amsterdam News and follow us on Twitter at NYAmNews. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. Thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Eleanor Tatum, and I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief of the New York Amsterdam News. The coronavirus crisis has brought serious distress to local economies and advertising along with them. The New York Amsterdam News has partnered with the Local Media Association during this unprecedented crisis. Help us continue our important work in chronicling the life of Black New Yorkers, and consider making a donation to the COVID-19 Local News Fund today. Go to givebutter.com/Amsterdam News. Again, that is GIVEBUTTER.com/Amsterdam News. Thank you and stay safe.